The massive gray ship emerged from the fog straight at them. "There it is!" Dan shouted as another ear-splitting blast ripped through the air. "Ham, row!" "Hang on!" Ian shouted. The gray mass looked more like a building than a ship or a gigantic tsunami made of metal. It broke straight at them. Terror blasted through Amy as the wall of the ship headed for them, tons of steel and mighty power. Hamilton's arms moved like pistons, each stroke going deep in the water, pulling them away from the ship's path. He kept them slicing through the water against incredible odds, just from the power of his arms and sheer will. The dinghy moved incredibly slowly. It seemed to Amy, but it moved scudding across the water. They could be pulling out to sea instead of toward land, but it didn't matter. They had to get away from the massive ship, out of the shipping lanes, anywhere but where they were, and with what could happen. She pictured the ship slicing into them, the boat splintering, their bodies tossed into the cold sea. "We've got to make it. We've got to." Horn blasting, fog swirling, Ham's desperate panting, his lungs on fire. They cleared it by only yards. Amy felt the immensity of the ship as the whole of it revealed itself as it slid past. "Get ready for the wake," Ham cried. It could swamp us. We've got to head into it." A wall of water was coming at them. The boat heaved up, and then slammed down. Water cascaded into the boat. They all screamed in terror as another wave hit. "Hang on!" Ham howled, wiping water out of his eyes. They hung on as the boat heaved and quivered, and the water roiled around them. Amy was afraid the boat would break apart. Then there was nothing but gray water and fog, and the slippery edge of the boat against her fingers. They were rocked on mid-sized waves. The cold water was up to their ankles. "Dan, Amy, start bailing," Ian said in a slipped tone that rang with desperation. "Dan, use your hands. Amy, take this." Ian took off his boot and handed it to her. "You'll freeze." "Better than drowning." Ian took off his other boot. Hamilton started to row again. "At least we know the ship is heading for the harbor." "But we're still in the shipping lanes," Amy said. "We have to go right or left." "Wait, I have one piece of good news." Ian's voice sliced through the gloom. "I grabbed a phone on the way out." He held up a phone. "Text Kara and see if she can get our position," Ian said. "And is there a flashlight app on it?" Amy asked. "We can use the strobe." Even though there was no longer a wake, the seas were choppy. The sleeting rain dripped down their necks, and soon they were all shaking with cold. Occasionally, a wave would splash over the edge of the dinghy. It was a small boat built for trips from the pier to a mooring. Not for this. Not for the choppy waters of an outer harbor. If they got swept out to sea, don't think about it. Concentrate on bailing, on rowing. "Did Kara answer us?" Amy asked Dan. Dan paused in his bailing to check the phone. She's pinpointed our position. He handed the phone to Ian. Amy rubbed her hands together. She felt frozen and scared. They were bailing as fast as they could, but it didn't feel as though they were making a difference. We're not going to make it unless you believe it, Ham roared as he rowed. There is no such thing as can't in the whole universe. Kara's given me compass headings. Ian accessed the app. 10 degrees right, Ham. Steer us home. With Ian directing and bailing, they made slow progress. Ian squinted off to his right. I think I see a light, he shouted. Look! Amy squinted. The fog was shredding into patchy areas. It lay more thickly on the water, but she was just beginning to see a shape. It's land, she cried. I see lights. I see them. That way. From across the dark water, a light blinked 3 times. Look, Dan shouted. He engaged the strobe on the phone, signaled back, holding the phone high. After a moment, the lights blinked 3 times again. Woohoo! Dan screamed. All right, you landlubbers, we're going to beach this thing. When they heard the dinghy scrape over rocks, they crawled out. They collapsed on a rocky beach. I thought we were done for, Amy said, her mouth against a slimy rock. After a few seconds, she raised her head. I hear traffic. What a beautiful sound. She turned and looked at Dan. He appeared pale, exhausted, his hands gripping the sand. I'm sorry, she said softly. I got us back into this. Dan struggled to sit up, his eyes on Ian and Hamilton as they stumbled up the beach toward a parking lot. Come on, guys, Hamilton called. Lights flashed as the car door opened, and Kara and Jonah tumbled out. Kara hurled herself at Ian and hugged him. Jonah clapped his arms around Hamilton. Truth? Dan asked. We both know we couldn't live with ourselves if we turned our backs on them. He rose and put his hand out to help Amy. She put her icy hand in his, and he pulled her to her feet. She was startled at his power. When had her baby brother become as tall as she was? When had he developed this wiry strength? After this, she started, but he interrupted. There is no after this, he said. There's only now. There's only stopping it. Amy forgot sometimes that her jokey brother had a way of seeing the world in terms of what was essential. She had a tendency to overcomplicate things. She relied on him for how he could lay things out, sum it all up in a simple truth. There was only now. There was only stopping this. Yes, we have to get it back, she said. All of it. Grace's house, the family. Dan's face tightened. There had been times when Amy had been afraid of that look, afraid that Dan was too young to look so hard. Now she had to admit how much she relied on his toughness. Oh, we'll get it back, Dan said, his eyes glittering. That's a promise. Rain drummed on the windshield of the rental car. Kara kept the motor running. She'd been blasting the heat so that the car was roasty warm. It calmed their shivering, but not their nerves. "The ship must be coming into port now," Ian said. "Halifax could blow sky high. So, which way should I go?" Kara asked, her hands on the wheel. Nobody said what they all were surely thinking. If they were too late, shouldn't they be leaving? Should she head to the airport? A sudden gust of wind shook the car. Amy glanced from one pale face to another. She knew that they all felt as she did. They couldn't leave the city, not even if there was just a minuscule chance to save it. "We need to go to the police," Kara said. "Even if nobody believes us." "It could be the only option left," Amy agreed quietly. "But the outcast said no outsiders," Dan pointed out. Nobody said anything for a long minute. They were trapped. As Dan would say, "I blew it," Ian said. "I overplayed my hand. I threatened Atlas, and we all came close to getting shot." "Don't beat yourself up about it, bro," Jonah said. "Focus on the problem. You didn't leave that boat until you knew we were all safe," Amy said. "Ian, that's true leadership. You were willing to be killed to save us." "What?" Kara asked. She whipped around to look at Ian in the back seat. "What did you do?" "He basically walked right up to a guy with a gun and said, 'Shoot me first,'" Hamilton said. "Bravest thing I'd ever seen, dude." "Or the stupidest," Kara exclaimed. "I know I often fall into the stupid category with you, Kara," Ian said, his face flushing. "But in this case, it was necessary." Amy almost groaned aloud. "No, Ian. Kara was trying to let you know she cares about you." He could be so clueless when it came to human emotion. "Now," Ian continued, "I agree that we need to bring in the authorities. I just don't think we're going to get far walking into a police station. They won't believe us, and it will take more time than we've got to establish that we're not crazy pranksters. We're not dealing with days anymore. We could be dealing with minutes. The storm has pushed up the timeline. The ship is in port. We have to do something. But who's going to believe a bunch of kids?" That question seems to come up to a depressing amount when you're a Cahill, Dan agreed.